welcome everyone to the Podster Sessions, which is kind of like a poster session, but also like a podcast style. So it's like the Podster, hosted by yours truly, Alessandro Tunes. And this week, our guest is Dr. Falk Eilenberger from the University of Jena. Let me just check. What is your actual affiliation?
So it's the,
why don't we just really entertain our audience with your triple affiliation to start with?
The University of Jena goes by the full name of Friedrich Schiller University, named after a semi-famous German poet that used to work here. Yeah, the second affiliation is with the Fraunhofer Institute for Applied Optics and Precision Engineering, which is an institute for more like applied sciences. And the third is the Max Planck School of Photonics. And I decided to don a to don a T-shirt of them today to just promote the brand even further.
Excellent. All right. Well, welcome to the weekly chat. This is, I guess, the inaugural episode.
Well, and the reason thanks for having me.
And the reason we are gathered here today is because recently you and I had the privilege of co-authoring a paper that I have printed out and am holding in my hand. And this paper is entitled Scalable Functionalization of Optical Fibers Using Atomically Thin Semiconductors. And it appeared in the prestigious materials journal, Advanced Materials. So congratulations on that result.
Okay, congratulations to you too.
This is a last author paper, right? Is this maybe, no, you had a few last author papers, but this is your, I guess, your first big one.
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah.
We want to acknowledge the hard work of the student, Kuye, first author of this work, who is an absolutely lovely human being, and I had the pleasure of meeting him last year.
I mean, and not just him and us too. I mean, it's I think 17 or 18 authors of the paper, and thinking back, removing either of them would have made the entire work impossible. Yeah, so it's that was the one great thing. I mean, one of the great things about this work. Really was the interdisciplinarity and the various expertises that came together and how it all worked out at the end. Yeah.
All right. So just to give an idea of what this is about, as I say, I think I'd like to just talk about three things and have a big picture approach where we can just kind of give a sense of the bird's eye view, someone who is a curious human. What is this about? The second thing I'd like to do is to make this for someone who is in the field on the greatest technical aspect that has been achieved here, which made it worthy of advanced material. And the third thing I'd like to do is just to talk a little bit about the labor that goes into doing this kind of work, in a sense, and kind of guiding through the process of what it took from the day that you had the idea to the moment it got published. It might be just a little interesting journey to give a sense of the kind of work that goes into one of these 7-page manuscripts and what it requires for that to happen. So what do you think about that?
Well, I love it. Let's go ahead.
But first of all, what on earth have you done here? This is it's a bit of a mouthful of a title for someone that's not too familiar with most of these things, but on a basic level, what has the group done here?
Well, actually it's quite simple, right? So I have a research group which is dealing with so-called photonics in 2D materials, yeah. And so and it doesn't really happen very often in science that an entirely new class of materials is discovered, right? Well, at least not in the 21st century. And about 15 years ago, Gaim and Novoselov, two researchers that are working in Great Britain, right, discovered that there exists a modification of carbon which is atomically thin, right? It's basically a layer of atoms, yeah, and it can be infinitely large in 2 dimensions, but in the other dimension, it is as thin as nature allows you to get. 1 atom, half a nanometer, yeah. And after this discovery, people started to look into various other of these materials and found these atom layer materials basically everywhere. And some of them are really, really interesting for optics and photonics because, due to their geometry, yeah, they squeeze in electrons in one direction and they have a very extreme light-matter interaction. So it's basically a miracle that you can even see them. Yeah, it's a half a nanometer thick layer. And only because the light matter interaction is so strong that you can actually see them under a microscope. Yeah.
So to summarize, ingredient number 1 is the thinnest possible thing you could make out of a thing.
Exactly, the thinnest possible thing. Ingredient number 2 is a waveguide. Yeah. So, or an optical fiber, a thing you made out of glass. It's very long and thin, and if you shine light into one end of the fiber, you can bend it and you can curl it and curve it, and it comes out pretty much unscathed on the other.
This is the stuff that carries the internet and that's carrying this very conversation.
Exactly. These are the 2 ingredients. Yeah. And the second ingredient is also something I did research on in the past for my PhD thesis. Yeah. So the idea was kind of straightforward to say, well, can we not combine these 2? Yeah. And there's, of course, not just I wanted to combine them because I could. Yeah. Or there's also a good reason to do so. Yeah. So people do experiments with these 2D materials by placing them on a substrate, on some, I don't know, some glass slide, and then they just shine light through it or reflect light from it. Yeah. And of course, you only have this half nanometer of interaction length there. Yeah. And therefore, all your signals are kind of weak. And my vision was to say, okay, let's just try and put them on an optical fiber. Yeah. And thereby have a very, very long interaction length between the 2, and thereby get strong signals back.
So basically, you have this stuff that is very extreme in various ways, in the sense that it's extremely thin, and then because it's extremely thin, the optical property per thickness is massive. Is that more or less the drift?
Yeah, that's more or less the drift. Yeah, but still, because the unit length in this case is so ridiculously small, the overall signal is still, you know, weak.
All right. So basically, what you do normally, this is your thing, and it goes through here. But with a fiber, you actually, you know, go through the fiber. So if you put the thing like this on top of the fiber and then guide the light through the fiber, then all of a sudden, the light is seeing the material a lot more. That's the idea. Yeah. Amazing. Experts think that these have very interesting properties that would make next generation technology work even better, let's say, more efficiently, lower powers, more compact, that if you have full control of these materials, that would be true. Now, let me ask you this. Let's go to the specific part 2. What I'm most interested in, I have to say, if I go to figure, the inset of figure 3A, I see a response, a third harmonic response that is not cubic, but that has this, and I think I fitted this in my spare time, and that number goes up by like something like the power of 9. So if I turn up my pump power, if I turn it up by a factor of 2, it goes up by 2 to the, no, 2, not to the 9, 2 to the 6 or something. What on earth is going on? Why is that not cubic?
Well, the first thing that we're seeing any kind of dependence there is basically a miracle in its own right. Yeah. So what happens if you, so what we've did there is we've taken a so-called femtosecond laser. So it's a laser which produces short pulses of light, yeah, which are very, very intense. And we ran them down this particularly fiber which is coated with this 2D material, and the reference fiber which is not coated with 2D material. Yeah, and if the laser power is high enough, any optical material will give you something which is called a nonlinear response. Yeah, and one of the consequences is that you shine an infrared light and you get visible light back. Yeah, so even the bare fiber which is non-coated does that, but the silica that this bare fiber is made from, you know, is kind of weak in this response. Yeah? So and what we did is in this experiment, basically we compared this visible light production response, it's called third harmonic generation, yeah, from a bare fiber and a fiber which is coated with this 2D material. Now you have to bear in mind that if you think about the cross section of the fiber, the part that guides the light is about 2 microns in diameter. Yeah, so it's 2000 by 2000 nanometers. And the film we've added on top of this is half a nanometer thin. So it's basically like putting peel on an apple. Yeah. Now, what we see is that the third harmonic response of the coated fiber is actually measurably stronger than the third harmonic response of the uncoated fiber, which means that...
So just to point out, normally the thing is, one of the signatures of third harmonic generation is this cubic dependence,
Yeah.
right? So the fact is that you turn up your power by a factor of 2, the measured signal goes up by a factor of 8. And you are seeing something way more extreme than that.
So, and just the fact that adding a single atom layer to your fiber changes the nonlinear response measurably is quite a miracle in its own right, and it's really a testament to the nonlinear, the strength of feedback that these 2D materials give, and the ability to change, to engineer properties of optical waveguides. Now, as to the stronger than cubic scaling, that's a bit difficult because we did not design these fibers to support third harmonic generation. Yeah? So this process is quite complicated because it involves something called modal matching, it involves phase matching, yeah? And it turns out that the fiber we chose is actually really ill-suited for that task. Third harmonic generation, you have to broaden the spectrum first, yeah, and then you see something, and they have you have to go through a few steps in this process, and this gives you this non-cubic scaling.
The non-cubic scaling comes from the fact that you are basically broadening the spectrum, which gives you extra energy to then do a third harmonic generation with, which then itself scales cubically. Is that the deal?
Exactly right. So it's a cascaded process. You broaden your pump infrared spectrum first, yeah. Eventually it reaches a spectral band for which there is phase matching to at least some higher order modes, and then you see third harmonic generation, and this kind of cascaded process, if you just plot it on a polynomial scale, it doesn't look cubic anymore.
Has this type of thing been measured before, this non-cubic third harmonic, as a result of the cell phase modulation?
So there was some prior work by the group of Markus Schmidt, who's also participated in this specific work we're talking about today, and they've investigated this specific process quite in detail.
What do you hope that people are able to see in this that you think that someone just reading it superficially might miss? What is a thing that you would?
3 things I wanted to see. Yeah. So first, like the last we've already talked about, that's the nonlinearity. So it's a way to engineer the nonlinear properties of an optical fiber in a way which wasn't there before. Yeah. The second thing is, I think it's a path towards optical sensing applications. Yeah. Imagine the following: it's a very long optical fiber, yeah, and part of this fiber is coated with this 2D material. Yeah. And now these 2D materials, they are basically they are just surface, so they're intrinsically super sensitive to the chemical composition of the environment. Now what you would do is you would place that part with the 2D material at some place, yeah, where you want to measure, for example, the chemical composition of. And then you send a laser through the fiber, it interacts with the 2D material and gives you other light back. And this in a process called photoluminescence, that's also described in the paper. And the way this photoluminescence works out, yeah, does change depending on the chemical composition of the environment. So this way you can set up a remote sensing scheme where you can have your sensing device at some place, yeah, and your sensor, which is attached to possibly a very long fiber, somewhere else, in some place which you probably otherwise couldn't physically access. Yeah.
And I guess the whole point of this is that the frequency at which you sense is completely different from your pump, so they're completely separate. So you can send any easy laser through, so whatever light comes back is basically telling you what's happening over there.
Exactly, you got that, Alex. Yeah? And so the first thing is really the process that we're using. Yeah. So we are in this super lucky position, and that we have good collaboration with the group of Andrei Ciuciani, yes, who's also co-author of this paper, who's also working at my university, and he can grow these 2D materials in a process called chemical vapor deposition. Yeah. So what's state of the art is that people buy naturally grown crystals of this 2D material and then use a sticky tape to tear off small bits and pieces of 2D materials and then they placed on a sample. And the material quality is pretty cool, but it's not scalable, right? You couldn't make an application from that. Yeah. Like imagine people at, I don't know, Intel or so producing computer chips by sticky taping materials on substrate. The idea is just cringeworthy. You know? So he's got this process where he can like chemically grow these 2D materials. The amazing thing really is that because these 2D materials don't chemically stick to the surface they grow on, they're just something called van der Waals bound, they can basically grow crystalline on any substrate, even if as if in our case the substrate is not flat. And so this is something that you do not get for any crystalline 3D material. So if you want to, for example, combine an optical fiber with a semiconductor laser, you always have to do this in an a posteriori manner. You have to produce a fiber, you have to produce your semiconductor, and you have to stick them together somehow. And this makes a lot of optical components, quite frankly, very expensive, because there's just a lot of steps involved. And with this 2D materials, you can now grow your semiconducting crystal directly on an arbitrary surface, even an optical fiber. And this is, I think that's an amazing property.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it just means you can take any off-the-shelf component, whatever's lying in your cupboard, and immediately enhance it. Wasn't this fiber lying somewhere around in your cupboard? In a sense, it's the strength of it. What you mentioned earlier, the fact that your fiber was not optimized or it's a horrible fiber to do it, is kind of the point. You picked a random structure and made it amazing.
Random. Yeah, it's in fact, it is carefully chosen. Made by the group of Heike Heideprim Ebendorf in Adelaide, and something called an exposed core fiber. So to the experts, typically light in an ordinary optical fiber is guided inside of the fiber, and you could place any kind of material on the surface. And it's on the bottom left of your picture. And this fiber, so like light, which is guided on the inside, would not interact with material on the surface. And the specialty of these nanostructured optical fibers is that the guiding core is exposed to the outside world. And if you place some material on the guiding core, it will actually interact with the light. And as far as I understand, the University of Adelaide is basically the only group in the world which can produce these special kind of fibers.
Amazing, thanks for that, Falk. So that ends part 2, I guess, part 2.1. And so for our final segment of our show today, I think it would be good to just acknowledge the insane amount of work of how many authors is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, no. Can't even, doesn't matter. Embarrassing moment. Let's just say, let's stick with 18. All right, I will check later and then superimpose it on here in my embarrassing counting moment. Of all the hard work that went on, maybe if you could just give a sense of the timeline and the work that went into this. When did it start?
Well, I think I can pretty much point to the initial idea, So I started my research group on this photonics in 2D materials in February 2018, And as part of that, like during the first few months, I was, basically touring a lot of other groups that I knew could be interesting for collaboration on campus, and kind of, disseminated my plans and discussed some possible collaboration projects, And so in one of these appointments took me to the group of Markus Schmidt at the IPHD, which is just around the corner. And at some point in Jay say, you know what? Look, I've got these interesting fibers here, and I'm not sure if you can put a 2D material on it, but I'm just going to show them to you. So he showed me like an SEM cross section, And I think that's basically where the immediate idea kind of was born, that because the fiber is from pure silica, and that group of Andrei Turjanin typically grows these 2D materials on silica, that we should, just give it a go and see if it works. So, and Markus did have some of that fiber available from a collaboration. He said, "Well, look, I'm just gonna call up, I'm just gonna call up my collaborators in Adelaide and see if they have anything against it." And they were fine, which was really good, because otherwise
freedom.
And then we carried the fiber to the group of Andrei Turjanin, And
so that means going down from Jena Eilenberg, you go all the way
Yeah,
down
yeah.
into
So Inner is
town,
a big
carry it
town,
over.
so it's I don't know. It's I guess 10 kilometers in cross section or so, and so most of the optics research is on one campus called the Beutenberg campus. But so Andres is downtown in a very old and venerable building. So I just took it, got on the bike, went there. It's about, I don't know, 3 kilometers or so, and just said, look, this is interesting. Can you just, I don't know, next time you grow something, place it in your oven next to the, to the other samples you're coding. Well, let's see what gets out. And his postdoc, Anthony George, who's actually the, let's say, the key scientist for operating this specific machine. He wasn't very convinced that it would work, but he said, "Oh, just place it there, and nothing, no harm done." So we got the fiber back a few weeks later, and then actually a student, Robin Schock, who's also on the paper, whom I was working with at that time, placed it on one of our setups where you can couple light into an optical fiber, and I think he saw photoluminescence through the fiber within a week or so. Yeah, so I mean, he wasn't really experienced with that setup, but within a week we saw something. Yeah, and that was basically one of these rare projects where on first attempt we basically had seen that the concept worked in principle. Yeah, and
So photoluminescence, by the way, is a signature that you've got the 2D material and it's doing its job.
Yes, exactly. So this is something you would not see from a bare fiber, and this is a specific, like this gets a specific spectral signature that you can very clearly attribute to these 2D materials. Yeah.
So within a week of making this, you already knew it had worked.
It was like half a year into the project. Yeah, and then it's 2 more years to publication, and you spend basically 1.5 years filling up the patches in your documentation. So you do measurements and more measurements and measurements to exclude other explanations, to get a more quantitative understanding of that and to really be able to write down a story.
So Kuye, who's the first author of this paper, joined you at this stage?
Just at the point where we made these first measurements. Yeah.
So once you knew it worked, then you had someone working on this for a full year systematically.
So, Robin was doing a great job, but he had to leave us for personal reasons. And also, I mean, he was a student, so he couldn't devote full time to that. Yeah. And so Kuyet basically took over, and he, he developed the setup to an entire new level, which is really suitable for these 2D materials. And he made lots of experiments. At some point, he carried his entire setup to the lab of Markus Schmidt, because we needed a different laser with different properties to measure that nonlinear stuff. And that's basically how it goes. It took more than a year, and was pretty much finished by the time we were hit with Corona. So that was, I shouldn't say fortunate in this context, yeah, but at least this was, it could have been worse in this respect. Yeah, and then we started writing it up in March. Right. Yeah, we sent it in with advanced materials. I think we sent it in May or on the very early days of June, and yeah,
couple of months.
We've been talking about a role of some of the people here, and there's quite a few people that I haven't mentioned. It's obviously too much with 18, but it's in our scientific world, we tend to become really awfully specialized and kind of just work really focused in our niche. Yeah, it's just because you just have so and so much time. And this was really cool because in essence it's an interdisciplinary project. Yeah, so there are chemists here that do the grow with the I'm a physicist. I would say the fiber drawing has a lot of engineering aspects to it, and all with the different also seeing how passionate all the people were towards this project is really amazing, and it's really it's been a pleasure, really. I don't have this group for so long, yeah. So this is basically, I'm officially called a junior research group leader, although, right, you see the junior is kind of
well, I mean, Reed Richards is played by a 25-year-old, so it's fine. It's the like Mr. Fantastic.
The Flash.
Yeah.
Well, so but it's really a new role that you take as such a research group leader, right? So you don't typically go into the lab and do the experiments. Yeah, it's more that you try to, you know, to create an environment that all these different people can and want to work together efficiently. Yeah. So it's a lot of email writing, a lot of phone calls. But that's great fun too, right? Because you have to constantly also try to get your head wrapped around the problems everybody has, although it's not your expertise, and see how you can help them, or who else you know that may be able to help. And it's a great experience, right? It's more delving into the social aspect of science.
Absolutely.
Fun.
Falk, thank you so much. It's been a delight chatting with you.
Pleasure.
I would like to invite, if you've been inspired by this, I invite you all to download this paper and read it in your lunch break like I did today. Scalable functionalization of optical fibers using atomically thin semiconductors, advanced materials 2020.
As a German,
Link below.
it's going to be a long lunch break.
Right.
All right.
Bye, everyone, and see you next time.
See you next time. Bye-bye.